Have you ever looked at someone, not with judgment, but with quiet concern, and wondered, how did they end up so lost? Not lost in intelligence, but lost in purpose, in values, in how they live. Now, before you click away, let's be clear. When we talk about a stupid man in this video, we're not mocking anyone. We're not measuring IQ or academic credentials. We're borrowing the lens of one of the greatest thinkers of the ancient world, Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. And in his eyes, stupidity had nothing to do with being smart and everything to do with being misguided. To Seneca, a stupid person is someone who chases what doesn't matter. Someone who trades meaning for distraction. Someone who's ruled by their impulses, by anger, greed, envy, without ever stopping to ask, is this the kind of life I want to live? Think about that for a moment. Because we live in a time where success is often defined by what you own, not what you are. We reward noise over depth, appearances over wisdom, but Seneca invites us to pause and see beyond the surface. This video isn't about pointing fingers. It's not about calling anyone out. It's about something far more important. It's about recognizing the subtle ways that we too might be drifting from our better judgment. It's about waking up before it's too late. And here's the key. According to Seneca, stupidity isn't permanent. It's not a sentence. It's a signal, a red flag, a whisper from the soul saying, there's still time to change direction. So if you're someone who values clarity, strength of character, and living with intention, stay with me. Because in the next few minutes, we'll explore what Seneca called the real signs of a foolish life. Not to condemn, but to reflect. And maybe, just maybe, step closer to the kind of wisdom that can steady us through whatever life brings. True wisdom begins with self-awareness. Let's begin. 1. Misplaced values and chasing illusions. Have you ever met someone who seems to have everything? The money, the status, the fancy car, the admiration of others. And yet, something about them feels empty. They speak loudly about their accomplishments. They drop names in conversations. They post every win on social media, as if the world needs to constantly see their success. At first glance, it might seem like confidence. But look a little deeper, and you might see something else. A desperate need to be seen, to be validated, to be approved of. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, saw this kind of man over 2,000 years ago, and he had a name for him. Not an idiot, not a fool in the modern sense, but a man living by misplaced values, chasing illusions that will eventually vanish. Seneca wrote that the truly stupid man isn't one who lacks intelligence, but one who builds his life on foundations that were never meant to last. And what are those foundations? Wealth, fame, pleasure, applause. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying nice things, being recognized for your work, or celebrating success. But the problem arises when these things become our definition of self. When we believe we are only somebody if other people are watching. When our self-worth rises and falls with the opinions of strangers. Seneca warned, the man who places his happiness in things outside himself is destined to be broken when fortune changes. Think about that. What happens when the applause stops? What happens when the business fails? The crowd moves on, or someone younger, richer, or louder takes the spotlight. Suddenly, the man who once stood tall begins to crumble, not because he lost something, but because he never built anything within. And that, Seneca said, is the great illusion. To think that a life of status and possessions is the same as a life of meaning. Let me ask you, have you ever been caught in that trap? Chasing a number in your bank account, hoping it'll bring you peace? Waiting for someone to praise you so you can finally feel enough? We all fall into it sometimes. That's what makes this insight so powerful. Because Seneca wasn't condemning those people, he was warning us. He was saying, don't build your home in a storm. Build it on something solid, something eternal. And what is that solid ground? Inner virtue, clarity, reason, self-respect. These are the things no one can take from you. They don't depend on the stock market or your follower count. They don't fade when trends change. Seneca saw the man who brags about his riches, who dominates every conversation with tales of his success, as a tragic figure. Why? Because he has no anchor. He confuses noise with meaning, and when life throws him a storm, and it always does, he has nothing to hold on to. You see, real strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's built in solitude. It's the peace you carry when no one's watching. So the next time you find yourself envying someone's lifestyle or feeling small because your life doesn't look as impressive, remember what the Stoics taught us. The happiest man isn't the one with the biggest stage. It's the one who knows who he is when the lights go out. Seneca said, "He who is content with himself has the greatest wealth." Ask yourself today, am I chasing illusions or building something real? Because one path leads to emptiness, the other leads to peace. 2, emotional volatility, especially anger. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone completely lose it over something small? Maybe their coffee order came out wrong. Maybe someone cut them off in traffic. Or maybe they didn't get the recognition they expected. And suddenly, boom, they explode. Their voice rises, their face turns red, and their anger spreads like wildfire. Now here's the thing. That kind of reaction doesn't mean they're powerful. It means they're trapped. Trapped in a belief that every slight is a personal attack, that every wrong demands revenge, that if they don't lash out, somehow they've lost. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, wrote about this long before road rage and social media arguments existed. He said, "The angry man thinks he is right, but what he reveals is how little control he has over himself." To the Stoics, uncontrolled anger was not a show of strength. It was a sign of foolishness. Not because emotions are bad, but because anger without reflection is self-destruction. Think about how many people you know, maybe even yourself at times, who blow up over the smallest things. Then hours later, they regret it. They feel embarrassed. They wonder, why did I let that get to me? It's because they never stopped to question the feeling. They just reacted. According to Seneca, that's the key difference between a wise person and a foolish one. The wise pause. The fool explodes. The fool believes that anger is always justified, that if they feel offended, then someone must pay. But the Stoics taught us to step back and ask, is this really worth my peace? Most of the time, it's not. Imagine someone insults you in public. It stings. You feel heat rising in your chest. But what if instead of yelling or getting even, you simply stayed still? What if you looked at that moment as a test of your strength, not a threat to your pride? Because here's the truth. When we lash out without thinking, we're not punishing the other person. We're punishing ourselves. We give away our power. We abandon our calm. And we let them decide how we feel. And yet we do it again and again. Seneca called this the cycle of the fool. He gets angry. He acts without thinking. He suffers the consequences. But instead of learning, he repeats it over and over again. Sound familiar? We live in a time where outrage is rewarded, where being offended is seen as a badge of honor. But the Stoics would remind us, not every insult deserves your attention. Not every provocation deserves a response. Sometimes silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. So the next time someone tries to push your buttons, pause. Ask yourself, am I reacting from ego or responding from clarity? Is this moment worth losing my peace over? Because here's what Seneca believed. A truly strong man is not the one who wins arguments. It's the one who masters himself. Let them shout, let them provoke, but you stay grounded. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You don't have to take every bait. You don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Third time wasted in distraction. Have you ever reached the end of a day and thought to yourself, where did all the time go? You weren't lazy, you weren't idle, you were busy. Emails, errands, notifications, social invites. But somehow, none of it felt meaningful. Seneca had a term for this: busy idleness. He observed something deeply ironic about human behavior, that many people, perhaps most, are constantly in motion, but going absolutely nowhere. They run from one distraction to the next, binge watch entire seasons, scroll through hours of content, attend gatherings they don't enjoy out of fear of missing out, and then they complain, there's just never enough time. Sound familiar? Here's what Seneca believed. Time isn't the problem. Attention is. We're not running out of hours, we're wasting them. And it's not just about productivity, it's about meaning. The foolish man, Seneca said, fills his life with noise so he never has to hear the silence. Because in the silence comes the hard questions. Am I living a life I actually value? Do I even know what matters to me anymore? What have I done today that nourished my mind, my character, or my soul? But rather than sit with those questions, the foolish man opens another app, joins another event, adds another item to his to-do list. He stays busy, but is he actually living? This isn't just a Stoic idea. Modern psychology now echoes what Seneca saw long ago, that we often use distraction to numb discomfort, and when we don't face our inner life, our thoughts, fears, and values, we drift. We drift into routine. We drift into other people's agendas, and before we know it, years pass. Seneca warned, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. He wasn't saying you should never relax, enjoy a movie, or socialize, but he urged us to be conscious of how we spend our time. To ask, is this activity adding something to me, or just filling space? And more importantly, what am I postponing by always being busy? Because often we postpone the very things that would give our life direction, studying wisdom, practicing virtue, deepening our relationships, reflecting on who we want to become. But we say, I'll do that later. Right now, I'm just too overwhelmed. The tragedy, we're overwhelmed by things that don't matter. So here's the hard truth. Being busy doesn't always mean you're doing well. Sometimes it just means you're afraid to be still. But real growth, real peace requires stillness. It requires time alone with your thoughts, time to read, to ask deeper questions, to examine your direction. Because if we don't choose how we spend our time, someone else will. So what's the takeaway? Don't confuse movement with progress. Don't mistake noise for purpose. And don't wait until life feels less busy to start living intentionally, because that day may never come. Seneca said, life is long if you know how to use it. Start small. Maybe it's 5 minutes of silence each morning. Maybe it's saying no to one unnecessary obligation this week. Maybe it's finally opening that book that's been sitting on your shelf. Whatever it is, do it now, because your time is the most precious thing you'll ever own. And once it's gone, you don't get it back. 4. External control over happiness. Have you ever met someone who rides life like an emotional roller coaster? One moment, they're on top of the world, smiling, celebrating, convinced that life finally makes sense. But the next, they're in pieces, crushed by failure, heartbroken by one bad turn of events. It's as if their entire mood, their self-worth, their sense of peace, depends completely on what's happening outside of them. Sound familiar? Seneca, the ancient Stoic philosopher, warned us about this pattern. He said that the fool is the person who pins their happiness or their misery on fortune, on things they can't control. When everything's going their way, they're euphoric. But when life shifts, as it always does, they collapse. Why? Because they never built anything stable on the inside. They believed that peace, Purpose and joy could be found in success, praise, luck, or smooth sailing. But the Stoics knew better. They taught us that true peace doesn't come from fortune, it comes from character. Let me ask you this. Have you ever gotten something you really wanted? A job, a relationship, a new opportunity, only to realize the feeling didn't last as long as you thought it would? That's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because external rewards were never designed to sustain you. They're fleeting by nature. They rise and they fall. The problem is, many people base their entire emotional life on these ups and downs. They feel amazing when life smiles at them, but shattered when it doesn't. But here's the truth. If you let circumstances dictate your inner state, you'll never know peace, because life will always be unpredictable. Seneca wrote, "A man's peace is not determined by external fortune, but by the strength of his soul." Let that sink in. The wise person, the Stoic, doesn't cheer only when things go well, nor despair when they don't. They remain grounded. They understand that control lies not in changing the world, but in mastering their response to it. Look, there's nothing wrong with celebrating success. There's nothing wrong with feeling sad when things don't go your way. But the difference is, do you become enslaved by those emotions? Do you lose yourself in victory? Do you fall apart in defeat? Or can you carry a steady mind through both? Because here's what the Stoics taught. You are not your wins, you are not your failures. You are how you carry yourself through both. That's where your strength lives. That's where real wisdom begins. So when life turns against you, will you crumble? Or will you rise above it, not with arrogance, but with calm? When fortune favors you, will you boast and cling to it? Or will you enjoy it with gratitude, knowing it can fade, and that's okay? Epictetus wrote, "The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. The fool waits for life to be perfect before he feels content. The wise create that contentment from within." So ask yourself today, what are you depending on for your happiness? Is it something you can lose? And if so, what would happen if it were taken away tomorrow? The answer to that question might reveal where your foundation truly lies. And if it isn't built on character, clarity, and inner strength, maybe it's time to rebuild. Because no matter how chaotic the world becomes, you can always return to the calm inside. 5. Avoidance of self-examination. Have you ever met someone who's always busy, always doing, but never really thinking? They make one decision after another. They chase the next thing, the next relationship, the next distraction, without ever slowing down long enough to ask, why am I doing this? Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, believed that this, above all, is one of the most dangerous traits a person can carry: the refusal to examine one's own life. It doesn't look dangerous on the outside. In fact, it often looks productive. But underneath all the movement is a kind of blindness. Because without reflection, we just repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Seneca said that the foolish man doesn't pause to ask moral questions like, what is the good life? Am I becoming a better person? Is this choice aligned with my values or just my impulses? Instead, he dismisses such thoughts as philosophical nonsense. He sees introspection as a waste of time, something impractical, maybe even weak. But let me ask you this. What's more dangerous, thinking too much or never thinking at all? The truth is, most of us aren't taught to reflect. We're taught to achieve, to act, to go faster. But we're not always taught to sit quietly and ask ourselves the hard questions. And so we end up running in circles, making decisions we later regret, living out the same unhealthy patterns, different jobs, different people, same outcome. Because we never stop to ask, what kind of person am I becoming? What do I actually believe in? Seneca believed that a man who doesn't reflect is a prisoner of his own habits. He's not really choosing his life, he's reacting to it. Every decision is based on emotion or ego or urgency, never wisdom. And without reflection, there's no growth. There's no moral compass, no inner guide, just impulse. You might think of someone who jumps from one relationship to another, blaming the other person every time, or someone who keeps switching careers, constantly frustrated, but never pausing to consider if the problem might be deeper, internal. That's what happens when we avoid self-examination. We stay stuck in cycles we don't even realize we're in. But the Stoics saw reflection not as some luxury for monks or philosophers, but as a daily necessity. They believed every human being should take time, every day, to ask, did I act with integrity today? What triggered me and why? What could I do better tomorrow? And here's the truth. Self-examination is not weakness, it's courage. It takes strength to be honest with yourself, to admit where you've gone wrong, to change course. So if you find yourself always rushing, never pausing, always blaming others or circumstances, maybe it's time to stop, to sit with your thoughts, to journal, to reflect. Because wisdom doesn't come from age or experience alone. It comes from examined experience. Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Don't be afraid to look inward. That's where the real answers are. And that's where lasting change begins. So let's bring this full circle. When Seneca spoke about stupidity, he wasn't trying to insult anyone. He wasn't calling people names or casting judgment from a pedestal. He was offering something far more valuable, a mirror, a chance to stop, to look inward, to ask ourselves, am I living wisely or just reacting to the world around me? To the Stoics, stupidity wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't about education or background. It was about how we live. Whether we chase what's fleeting or invest in what's lasting, whether we're ruled by anger, pride, and distraction, or grounded in reason, discipline, and purpose. And here's the good news. Being stupid in the Stoic sense isn't a life sentence. It's a starting point. Seneca believed deeply in our ability to change, to grow, evolve, and rise above our old ways. But only if we're willing to do the work. So what does that look like? It starts with reading, seeking wisdom, not just information. It grows with discipline, learning to pause before reacting, to choose peace over pride. And it deepens through daily reflection, asking yourself each night, did I live in alignment with the kind of person I want to be? Because in the end, it's not fortune or fame that defines you. It's not how loud your voice is or how full your calendar looks. It's whether you've anchored your life in what's real, whether you've cultivated virtue, clarity, and moral direction. So I'll leave you with 3 powerful questions from Seneca himself. 1. Do you value what's fleeting or what's stable? 2. Are you ruled by envy, anger, or ego? 3. Do you ever stop to reflect on where your life is truly going? These aren't questions just for other people. They're for you. They're for me. They're for anyone who wants to live not just longer, but better. Because every day we avoid these questions, we drift. But every day we choose to face them, we grow. So if this message resonated with you, I invite you to do one small thing today. Take 5 quiet minutes tonight. Ask yourself honestly, am I living wisely? And if not, start. It's never too late to turn around. Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. If you found value in today's video, please subscribe, leave a comment with your own reflection, and share this with someone who might need a reminder to slow down and go deeper. Until next time, stay grounded, stay thoughtful, and I'll see you in the next video.